Dan, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thanks for coming to Washington.
Yeah, thank you.
Please introduce yourself.
I'm Dan Horowitz. I'm a criminal defense attorney, and in this context, I'm also the husband of a woman who was brutally murdered by a 17-year-old.
And that was in California?
That was in California.
Back in 2005?
2005.
You have done a lot of TV and legal commenting on high-profile cases.
Yes.
Tell us about a couple of those.
Well, I covered the Scott Peterson murder trial in Redwood City, California. I was good friends with the trial judge and really got sort of to know how Mark Geragos thought and got into the inside workings of that case. Covered it for MSNBC and also CNN.
Mm-hmm.
Then after that, I covered the Michael Jackson child molest case and for MSNBC, and I actually expected and predicted the acquittal in that case.
Right.
And at the time Pamela was murdered, I had my own very high-profile case. It was the Susan Polk case that was just starting, and Dateline NBC did a 1-hour special on it. I watched it with Pamela that night. Nancy Grace called and congratulated us on the story. And
this is the woman who murdered her husband after years of abuse?
Yes, she was his patient when she was 14 years old, psychiatric patient. And years later they got together, and the question was, did he use his influence as a therapist to sort of capture this young, flowering child with minor problems and turn her into his almost concubine wife, since he was much older and very manipulative. Our defense was basically that after many years she just exploded with rage. So how do you call it a premeditated murder given that backdrop?
And while you were involved in this case, your beautiful bride was brutally murdered by a juvenile named Scott Dileski.
Yes.
Would you be willing to share that horrible chain of events with us?
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, I've never spoken about this and I've always refused to speak about it. But right now we are facing a nationwide movement to let people out of prison, including Scott Dileski, Pamela's murderer, by legislation, by fiat. So this is now, I'm breaking my silence. Up until the day he was caught, I spoke about it. But the day he was caught until now, I've not spoken about it. So we were on Dateline NBC that night. The case was shaping up well. I was finding great material to show that this husband was really quite nuts and manipulative. I found, for example, that he was performing exorcisms. And, okay, so then the next morning...
You've been a criminal defense lawyer for 29 years.
Yeah.
You've tried over 200 jury trials. You've
Correct.
had, what, 27, 28 death penalty cases? Only one of your client has received the death penalty.
True.
So you've had a fantastic record. You're a committed criminal defense attorney.
Right.
You, what, teach for the top criminal defense attorney organizations in California?
I've taught at the Death Penalty College. I've taught the federal public defenders. I've written many articles.
Okay, so no one's going to question whether or not you're dyed-in-the-wool criminal defense attorney from the tip of your toes to the top of your head.
Right. I mean, my so-called credentials in the liberal world go back to the civil rights movement in the 60s when I was just a kid, you know, fighting for social justice, fighting the whole concept of there but for fortune, you know, we could be criminals too. I've been in that camp, and I don't entirely abandon it. But why I'm speaking today, why I'm doing this, is because I also believe that when you get up every day and go to work and you take care of your children and your family, you have a right to be free of crime. And if somebody brutally victimizes your family, you have a right to expect that society is going to exact justice for you. You don't do it yourself. You don't go kill the person who killed your loved one. But you expect that society is going to take that person and put them where they'll never hurt anybody again.
Well,
and it's not happening.
In the spring of 2005, when you're representing this woman, where are you and Pam living?
Okay, me and Pam, for the 10 years that we were married, lived in a little modular home, a manufactured home, you know, 1,100 square feet on a 13-acre parcel, a beautiful parcel. And we didn't really care about, you know, fancy anythings. We liked living there. Then for whatever reason, we said, well, you know, her kids are grown. We have the ability to do it. Let's build a nice house. So
and you have 13 acres, so...
So we built a house. We were in the process of building it, but we lived where we had always lived. We never locked the door. None of our neighbors did.
And this is in California
somewhere? In California, in Lafayette, which is a suburb of San Francisco.
Okay. And
we felt safe. And that Saturday morning, I got out of bed. I went down the hill to where I kept my dogs. They were fenced in an orchard that's about 1/3 of an acre. Fed them, looked at a tree that the rodents had killed, felt bad. Went back to the house, and I felt like waking up Pamela saying, the rodents killed the tree, but she was sound asleep, and I just played around on the computer and then took off for a meeting on this new case, where I was meeting with my investigators and paralegal and one of the other attorneys on the case, Ivan Gold.
So it's a working Saturday.
Working Saturday. I actually was going to meet with Bob Massey from Fox News earlier in the morning and then go to that meeting. And I did all those things. I called Pamela a few times. She didn't answer the phone. I thought nothing of it, but that happens. You know how it is. You can call home and
sure.
Your spouse, you get mad later. Why didn't you pick up the phone?
Right.
And when I came home later that day, I drove up the driveway and her car was still there, and I actually expected that she would be gone because she had plans to go to the ballet with a friend.
And your new house that you're building is just within eyeshot.
It's in the distance. Yeah, it's in the distance.
And it's a normal sunny California day?
Yeah, it's about, I'm forgetting now, but maybe it's late afternoon, but it's still sunny. It's nice out.
But you have a weird feeling because her car's there.
It's not right. I mean, anything can happen. I remember getting my computer case out of the car and saying, don't get upset. Just act like everything's normal until you find out it's not.
So you're walking to the front door.
Walk up the stairs to the deck, see the front door, and there's smears on the door, but they're blood smears, but they don't look like blood to me. They're not that color.
And that was not there when you left in the morning,
It wasn't there when I left, but it was some sort of smear. And I opened the door, and I pushed it open, and all of a sudden, everything was a crime scene photo. There's a sound, like a high-pitched shh sound, and like a ringing kind of sound, and your whole body transforms with energy. And I just saw a crime scene photo of Pamela. And then within a fraction of a second, I realized it was her, and I'm simultaneously just screaming.
She's on the ground.
She's on the ground. She's been brutally beaten. And I look around the house, and it's just a scene of blood. And now things fade in the sense that all of a sudden now I remember it being dark. Whereas you just asked me, and I said it was light. I remember going in the house and calling 911 and then saying, what are you doing? There's 3 places where somebody can come. It's not defensible space. And I put down the phone and picked up my cell phone and called not 911, but I knew the regular number for the Lafayette PD.
You didn't check her pulse or anything like that?
It was obvious that she was dead. Actually, I had already, before I called 911, I checked her temple. Not her. I think I checked either. I don't even remember if I checked her carotid or her temple anymore. But I checked her pulse first. But I knew when I was doing it that it was over. I mean, it was obvious. I mean.
And you said there was blood
everywhere.
Not just around the body?
No, splattered because there had been a tremendous struggle. Pamela and I had discussed that you never give in. That if somebody's going to try to hurt you, I mean, given what I do, I know this is the same thing that all police officers teach their family and prosecutors. You fight because nobody's going to let you live just about, in these crazy situations. You fight like hell. And even though she was 52, actually, and he was 17, she fought him, I believe, for probably 3, 4, 5 minutes. And she eventually took from him, by kicking, a little DNA that helped convict him. If she hadn't fought the way she fought, if she'd just gone down or whimpered or cried, he would have gotten away with it. But what I say to people is that she convicted him because she fought. She ended up getting him.
So she told you through her own wounds the story?
Yeah. Well, when I came in, I knew the story. I know my house. I knew Pamela. And I could just see the struggle. I could see where she tried to push him out the door, almost had it closed, and then those handprints where he shoved it open. I could see where she then fell back against the big TV and rolled it back. I could see where she pushed. She was not a violent person. She was a very gentle person. And you can't win a fight against somebody with more energy than you without striking a fatal blow. She could push, she could hit, she could defend, but she didn't have the cruelty in her to kill. So even if she had an advantage over him, which I think at times in the fight she did, she couldn't capitalize on it.
And you've seen, by this point in your life, hundreds, if not thousands, of crime scene photos. You've seen blood cast off. You've seen blood spatter experts. You've cross-examined blood spatter experts. Right. Is this different? Is this a different scene? Is this a more than just the type of stuff you've seen before?
Well, yes and no. I mean, it was a much more violent scene.
How?
Well, there was a lot more blood. It was spattered more. It was very extensive. It just showed you that she was bleeding a lot and that they struggled a lot. That's what I saw. I mean, she did not give up easily. And at the end, of course, she was just covering up and curled up, and he was just pounding her. You know, that I learned later from other photos.
You call 911. Does it take the police a long period of time? Is it a short period of time? Do you know?
It actually took them very little time. To me, it felt like a very long time, but based upon what I learned from the prosecutor, it took about, I think, 12 minutes. Which is really record time. I mean, they got up there. Mm-hmm. But to me, it felt like half an hour.
And what happens? They show up?
They show up. I'm on the phone with the dispatcher, and she's saying, you know, walk over to the police. And I go, I can't. I don't want to leave her. I don't want to leave her, something like that. But then she says, we really need you to do it. So I start to walk over to the police, and I'm just wandering around, and a police officer comes by. And I see him, and it's so strange. I just want to hug him. I go, you can't hug a police officer at a murder scene. It's not what you do. And, you know, that's how I felt.
I don't think there's rules.
I know. It's just, you know, part of me was business. You know, like I even remember on the 911 call, sometimes I'm describing what's happening. Sometimes I'm screaming. Sometimes I'm crying. You flip back and forth. Because you got to be business, because on one level, here's a crime scene. You got to make sure that there's no perpetrators there. You don't want to disturb the crime scene. You want to describe what's happening. You understand there's going to be, you know, some record of this, and you want to be participating.
Right, so the professional lawyer side is doing stuff.
Right, doing stuff. But the other part of you, you just basically want your brain to explode so you don't feel the pain anymore. You know, you want this to go away. So both are going on.
And this juvenile killer, Scott Dylewski, he actually lived in the neighborhood.
I'd done free legal work for his mother, who lived down the road, because she was in a bad business situation and wanted to get out and didn't have money. So I just helped her get out of a bad business situation. I didn't charge her.
Did you know Mr. Dylewski?
No, I never met him. If I had known a kind of a weird, dark kid lived in my canyon, as we called it, in my area, I would have been more careful somehow.
He actually had committed a crime 2 days before this murder.
He had committed numerous crimes against neighbors, gone into people's houses, we learned, got on their computers, stole passwords. It was reported to the police just a day or two earlier that he had used one of my neighbor, Karen Schneider's, credit cards to order marijuana growing hardware and have it delivered to my house. Unfortunately, we didn't learn about that until after he was captured.
Of course, if you'd learned about that, who knows how things may have...
Yeah, if we learned about it, then the killing wouldn't have taken place in that way in that day. But what you got to know, what I've learned talking to crime victims, is there's always something that could have happened or could have been done. He studied to be a serial killer.
What do you mean he studied?
He had books, he had manuals, he drew art about being like a hooded cape, you know, killer. He listened to death music. I mean, this guy wanted to be a killer, so if he didn't kill that day and he didn't kill Pamela, he probably would have killed some other day, and if not Pamela, some other human being. So in the broader sense, not my loss, this man was going to kill at some point in his life, and he was going to do it again and again until he got caught. The only blessing from this is that Pamela was so tough that he only got to kill one person. She saved other lives.
He does this horrible crime against your bride. He goes back to his mother's farm or area house. He rids himself of his clothes and bloody evidence. And then his mother does what?
Well, he preserves them and puts them in an abandoned vehicle as trophies. And we believe he also took Pamela's eyeglasses as a trophy. His mother, when he's arrested several days later, his mother goes to the truck and starts to remove these bloody items. Fortunately, there was a press helicopter overhead, and she saw that and was afraid and left the items in the truck. She did, however, have many other items associated with the crime that she took several hours away to her sister's house and burned them, including his diary, which undoubtedly contained his plans for the killing.
And the press helicopter was over this area, one, because it's a horrific crime, but also partly because you're a famous person. You're a famous person by then, right?
I was a high-profile person, and I consulted...
You are a high-profile person.
And I consulted with people, and basically the idea was the trail gets cold, and you need to put pressure on people, letting them feel that they're going to get caught. Not only the perpetrator, but those who would help the perpetrator. So we did as much as we could to keep the media focused on the case. And thank goodness we did, because without that press helicopter, the items with Pamela's blood on it, his items, would not have been found. Mm. And even though you can say, well, the sister of Esther, the mother, felt guilty and called the police and wouldn't let Esther destroy any more goods at their house. Without the media pressure, I don't know what they would have done. They let her stay there and destroy goods and items at the beginning. And various people came forward, I think, because people do the right thing when they think that they'll get in trouble if they don't. And I mean, even the girlfriend's mother, this killer slept with his girlfriend after the killing, and then they went to the Renaissance Fair. The mother of this girlfriend found out a lot about what was happening, and she took evidence items, Scott's shoes, which were ultimately matched to the crime scene, and didn't turn them over to the police. But this woman who lives in my town, who waves to me with a big goofy smile when she sees me now, brought these items 2 hours away to Scott's mother, where Scott's mother was destroying evidence. So, people don't always do the right thing.
And there were warning signs, Dan, at his school, with his teachers, well before this happened, and they did nothing. Tell us about those.
He had an art teacher who saw this bloody, brutal murder art, and her rule, what she was taught in school, and what she testified to when she testified in his favor at trial, is that she thought he was talented, and that if she turned him in to the authorities, that they would crush his art, destroy his spirit. So she hid this art from the school administration. The school administration in Lafayette would have loved to have known, put this kid in therapy, and perhaps stopped him from going the next step, but she covered it up.
And didn't he have sort of a signature watermark or sort of a signature of his artwork, not only in class, but then at the crime scene?
Yeah, a cross with a double cross, which is, from his point of view, was sort of a devil type or a disrespectful symbol towards Christianity. And he would put that on all of his death art. And part of what he did with Pamela, after he tried to carve out her internal organs when she was alive, but she died, he then carved into her dead body his art symbol. See, to him, this was art. This was his art painted on a human figure. And in fact, at the trial, I noticed him staring at the pictures of the scene with almost self-admiration. Mm. And I thought, well, maybe it's just me seeing it. But the trial judge, Judge Zuniga, commented on that at sentencing. Because contrary to what these juvenile apologists say, Judge Zuniga very carefully decided whether to give him life without parole or life with the possibility of parole. But she found a complete absence of remorse. He failed to admit guilt. And he seemed so fascinated by his handiwork, as she called it. It was clear he took pleasure
Did he receive a able and zealous defense?
He got a great defense. I mean, his attorney put on character witnesses saying what a nice young man he was. You know, the jury was out a decent amount of time. I mean, the jury, I spoke to many of the jurors afterwards. They came up to me. They felt he got an excellent defense. And they gave him a very careful jury deliberation. I mean, they said, we didn't jump to conclusions. We listened to everybody. He got a very, very fair trial.
And this was not a whodunit.
No, it was an obvious, I sat through the preliminary hearing, and I'm a trained defense attorney. If there was any chance he didn't do it, I would have made a big fuss, because for my own safety, the safety of her family, and for the simple fact that I want to catch the man who killed her, I would have left no stone unturned. I had to be sure it was him. And when you looked at the DNA, which was unequivocally pointing towards him,
his signature,
the
proximity, the motive, the opportunity, I mean, it all.
But most damning was really his own statements, where he said to somebody, you know, my DNA might be on Pamela. What are you talking about? Well, she was driving her car on the road and that day, and she stopped, and she opened the door and grabbed me and said, I can't believe this is happening. Well, that insane type of story.
But there are no sanity issues with Mr. Dileski.
No, the story is insane. No, he's very sane. He was cold-blooded, but the story was insane. I mean, if Pamela did that, she would have been insane. And the point is that I know that what he did was he took what really happened. She grabbed him as they're fighting, and she probably when he first came in and said, I can't believe this is happening. Those were her words. Mm-hmm. But those were her words as he was killing her. And he wove it into this absurd story.
Now, there has been a concerted effort in your state before the legislature to abolish life without parole. Tell us about Senator Leland Yee's efforts and your involvement and what happened ultimately.
Well, obviously, everybody I know is against somebody spending the rest of their life in prison if they don't deserve it.
Of course.
If they,
and just to be clear here, you and I both agree that we need a proper, functioning, compassionate juvenile justice system, that most juveniles, when they commit crimes, should go through that, and that very few and only appropriate candidates should go to adult court, and only very few of those who are convicted of the worst crimes should be considered for life without parole. So we're not...
Right. There are certain juveniles who are not really juveniles. They're just people who are so twisted, just like child molesters, rapists. There are certain people who will never be okay. I've seen that in my own practice. There are some people who just situationally in the wrong place at the wrong time, it can happen. Or a bad background, but with
heat
some...
of passion, self-defense.
Send them to the military, they'll straighten up. But there are certain people who just are so twisted inside that they take pleasure in the suffering of others and are incapable of feeling genuine compassion. Scott Dileski is one of them. Senator Yee has created...
This is a state senator in California.
State senator, created a bill that set criteria...
Isn't he a psychiatrist or psychologist by training?
Yeah, he's a psychologist by training.
So he's not a lawyer.
Not a lawyer. And he has posited that every single juvenile is ultimately amenable to rehabilitation. So he created a bill that pretends to set criteria for parole eligibility. He says, well, they have to show remorse. And we all go, well, that's great. We want people to show remorse before they're paroled. But then he defines remorse in the bill as doing various things, including availing oneself of educational courses while in prison. So if you're really bored in prison and you take a course in basket weaving, that's showing remorse. Kept up contacts with people in the outside world. Well, Dileski does, because he's got an entire website dedicated to freeing him, claiming that he did not kill Pamela. That would qualify. So the criteria are so ridiculous. I've gone through I made believe that Adolf Hitler was a juvenile when he committed some of his murders. He would qualify. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. You can't take any serial killer who doesn't qualify under Senator Yee's criteria. So he basically is saying that every single youth who killed, no matter how cold-blooded they were and are, gets a chance at parole.
And didn't that first iteration of the bill solely quote from the Amnesty International Human Rights Watch lobbying piece.
Right, and I exposed in a I testified at the Senate against it, and I pointed out that the Human Rights Watch stories were fake, that any lawyer would know that the stories of kids who went along with crimes and didn't really intend to kill anybody, actually wanted to stop their friends from doing violence, so were there almost as like proctors or security guys, so that it was a robbery that didn't go wrong, then got life without parole, where the actual killers got to go home, with a minimum sentence. I mean, nonsensical stories,
but dressed up as
presented as real stories.
Yeah.
And so then Senator Cedillo, who wants to run for Senate, the real Senate, said, well, look, would you mind writing something up? We're very interested in what you have to say. So I went back and wrote up 50 pages that I thought were decent and nothing compared to, what a real serious, group can do. But I exposed how these stories were fake, how they didn't comport with the law, how they didn't comport with some of the facts that I knew of some of the cases. And I explained how you could review juvenile cases, and if there really was a miscarriage of justice, address it without setting free heinous killers like Scott Dulesky.
And it goes without saying, we're all against miscarriages of justice. We all don't want guilty people to be the ones who get punished and innocent people not even to be charged. I mean, that's not even the issue.
Right. I've spent my whole career doing that, and I told them how to do it.
Right.
It would be relatively inexpensive, and it wouldn't free any heinous killers. I mean, it would free the innocent or free the wrongly punished without freeing everyone else.
And you created a website.
And I created a website only after they ignored what I submitted. And only after I submitted it and Senator Yee made his bill, amended his bill to make it even easier for people like Scott Dulesky to get review of their sentence.
And that's Senate Bill, what, 399?
SB 399. So then I created my website.
And that was retroactive.
Yeah, it was
so
retroactive.
It would unwind all of these sentences for
Yes.
these juvenile killers and violent teens in California.
Yes. It would ignore the judge's analysis, where the judge made that determination already, and it would force the judge to use the criteria that Senator Yee had invented, which are not criteria at all. So it would essentially create litigation that ultimately would basically say every kid gets parole, even if he wasn't really a kid, but it was like a young person who tortured, raped, and enjoyed it, and to this day still enjoys what he did.
And in fact, in the language of the bill, they're just blatant misstatements of fact. Like it says, we're the only country in the world that authorizes life without the possibility of parole, which of course we know there's at least 11 countries, probably 14, that specifically authorize it, and dozens of others that have harsh sentences of hundreds of years for juveniles, so that's wrong. That we're in the violation of international law, that's wrong. And then the ponies up bogus statistics about how many people are actually serving that sentence around the country.
And they make them children. They're all kids, they're all children.
They call them children.
Yeah, and they're not. I mean, when you rape somebody, when you tie somebody up, sodomize them, and torture them, you're not a child. That's not what a child does. I could see a child picking up a gun and pointing it at a playmate and pulling the trigger, and that's a tragedy.
And that happens.
And that happens.
And they go through the juvenile justice system, and they're dealt with, hopefully, fairly and compassionately.
It's a big difference between the crimes that I see where kids get life without parole.
You mean juveniles?
Juveniles, yeah. You know, as a defense attorney, I'm used to calling them kids and children. It's one of the techniques that we use.
Yeah.
Although lately I've tried to be more honest, and I've actually found that works very well, in a courtroom. Some of the techniques that defense attorneys learn that are manipulative are not necessary.
The bill, finally, what happened to it, the latest iteration of it?
It passed the Senate. It went to the Assembly, and it passed one of the committees, but it didn't pass one committee by one vote. It failed, and it got killed. But what was
how did it fail?
I don't know.
Weren't there like 6 Democrats and 2 Republicans? I mean, the Republicans are outnumbered 2-1 on that committee.
Apparently, one Democrat Assembly person voted against it. I think her name is Ma. I don't know why she voted against it. What was interesting to me, too, is that when the committees looked at the financial impact, it was very clear to me that the impact would be between about $50,000 to $400,000 per juvenile. You have to hire experts, you have to have full hearings. If they did not get parole, they would file an appeal and then a habeas, and it could repeat 4 times. And yet the financial impact was deemed to be $15,000, which is impossible. You can't even transport the juvenile and get him a lawyer for that kind of money. So they lied about how much it cost, the proponents did. And they lied about the poor kids who are locked up unfairly as juveniles. You know, they would give you the name, like, you know, Randy G, and then they would tell some sad story. And I knew it couldn't be true. And when I looked at the Heritage write-up about how they did this, Heritage pointed out, well, yeah, in the footnotes, they say these are anecdotal. The kids just tell the stories, and we don't check them. Well, you know what? My clients tell me stories all the time, and I check them all the time, because if I went to trial on the stories that my clients told me, I would never win a case.
Well, especially the initial story.
Yeah, until I break them down, yes. And even then, you know, usually it's not 100% of the truth.
You obviously, like me and any other member of the bar in good standing, have an obligation to zealously and ethically represent your client. If a law, in your judgment, is unconstitutional, you will make that argument and have made that argument. What do you say to the argument that the other side is making that because of the decision in Roper against Simmons, which outlawed the death penalty for juvenile killers back in 2005 by the Supreme Court, that because of that death penalty case, that life without parole for juvenile killers is unconstitutional?
Well, it's an interesting argument. I've never seen any legal authority supporting that. Here's what I know. I know that the Supreme Court struggled with whether or not execution was proper for these really, really heinous crimes committed by people who might be a day shy of 18. And when they said we're not going to allow it, they were very clear that there was a viable alternative that would protect society, life without the possibility of parole. By imposing that sentence, we satisfy Roper and whatever concerns the Supreme Court had. But we protect society, because the bottom line is a large number of people paroled repeat their crimes. And if you are willing to kill before you're even 18, you are so broken inside that unless you have some miraculous healing, unless something almost extraordinary happens, all you're going to do is gain control mechanisms. You're going to learn how to walk and talk like a regular person, as do many serial killers. But ultimately, seething underneath is that same sickness that erupted at least one time as a juvenile. So the truth is, if we release juvenile killers, or even adult killers on parole, we will have a certain number of regular, ordinary, good people murdered because of that. And why? I mean, why let somebody kill knowing that if you release them 1 out of every 5 times or 10 times, they'll kill again? It doesn't make sense to me.
And finally, in our discussions leading up to this book and then the panel event today we had at Heritage, which is on the Heritage website and on C-SPAN, it's fair to say that you and I both agree that it's entirely appropriate for us to work on alternatives to incarceration for juveniles who commit misdemeanors, low-level drug offenders, restorative justice, and all the various things that can be helpful, drug court, domestic violence court, and all the rest of it. But that has absolutely nothing to do whatsoever with the separate and distinct issue of punishment for the worst of the worst, rapists, murderers, who happen to be under the age of 18.
I feel that this is not a conservative, liberal, or prosecution defense issue. Really, they come together because nobody that I know as a prosecutor, none of my opponents, is looking to imprison people for no reason. And people generally join the system because they think the system works. I mean, I know, you know, we talk in Alameda County about the Jensen-Hooley rule. Lowell Jensen and Jim Hooley, public defender and district attorney, who basically taught their troops to fight each other like animals, in the, like Mike Tyson against, you know, and Muhammad Ali in one ring. But then you do it as gentlemen when you're out of the ring, and you play fair and you never cheat. And these are the people who Human Rights Watch are accusing of cheating with these juveniles, and I know it's not true. These are people who want the wrong people to go away based upon a system that fights hard. When I'm on Nancy Grace, you know, I fight against Nancy. She takes the prosecution side. But she privately will tell you, look, thank goodness, you know, you fight hard, because as a prosecutor, if I didn't have good defense attorneys, I would be afraid that I could make a mistake. I'm human. But I want to beat you, and I won every case, but I did it fair and square. And that's how prosecutors are. And of course, defense attorneys want to fight hard. So none of us want to put people away out of meanness or for the wrong reason. What we're talking about here are people who are so evil that they've gone in front of a jury. The jury has convicted them of the highest level of crimes. Judges have looked at their case and said, we can't ever let this person out. You know, 30 years from now, the victims' families will be gone. I'll be too old to show up in my case. I've looked at it now. I saw the kid. I saw the young man. I've seen the case. He can't go free. Never let him go free. He'll do it again. And then the appellate courts have looked at it and agreed. Maybe the Supreme Court, the highest court in California, has agreed. There's been federal habeas. I mean, so many safety checks. These people don't get out. And why don't they get out? For me, it's not punishment. For me, it's public safety, because I don't want anybody else to go through what I went through. And you know what else? In prison, they can have a life. You know, they can read books. They can correspond. Some of them, in some states, can get conjugal visits after a while. They can fashion some sort of life. But to let them out to take another life, no way. They can even get married, for heaven's sake. You know, and some of them do.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you.